Between 1923 and 1946, 312 children enrolled at the Whitmore Academy for Exceptional Youth in rural Montana disappeared without a trace, their names erased from enrollment records, and their families told they had been transferred to better facilities. The discovery was made in 1987 when a construction crew renovating the abandoned school's basement found a hidden chamber containing 47 small wooden boxes, each labeled with a child's name, date of birth, and a single word, concluded. Inside each box were personal belongings, eyeglasses, shoes, diary pages, and locks of hair tied with black ribbon. The boxes were arranged in perfect rows, as if part of a methodical cataloguing system. What made the discovery even more disturbing was that many of the children's names appeared in local missing persons reports from the 1920s through 1940s, cases that had been mysteriously closed without. The brass nameplate at the entrance of Whitmore Academy gleamed in the Montana sun, its Gothic lettering announcing "Excellence through Discipline" beneath the school's coat of arms. Established in 1919 by Dr. Cornelius Whitmore, a Harvard-educated psychologist and philanthropist, the institution marketed itself as America's premier boarding school for exceptional children, those deemed gifted, troubled, or simply unwanted by. Dr. Whitmore's credentials were impeccable. A graduate of Harvard Medical School with additional training in Vienna under the tutelage of contemporary psychoanalysts, he had published extensively on child psychology and educational reform. His 1918 book, The Malleable Mind Shaping Tomorrow's Leaders, became required reading in progressive education circles. The book advocated for intensive behavioral modification techniques, claiming that proper conditioning could transform any child into a model citizen. The human mind, particularly that of a child, is remarkably plastic, Whitmore wrote in his introduction. With the correct application of scientific principles, we can eliminate undesirable traits and cultivate excellence. The child who arrives at our institution as a problem becomes, through our methods, a solution. The Academy's campus sprawled across 400 acres of pristine wilderness, 30 miles from the nearest town of Clearwater. The main building, a Victorian mansion that had belonged to a copper baron, housed the administrative offices and dormitories. Additional structures included a modern laboratory, a medical facility, and what Whitmore called the Character Development Center, a stark concrete building that stood apart from the rest of the campus. Parents from across the country sought admission for their children. The Academy's brochures, printed on expensive paper and filled with testimonials, promised transformation. "Send us your troubled child," one advertisement proclaimed, "and we will return to you a refined young person ready to take their place in society." The testimonials were compelling. Margaret Henderson of Boston wrote, "Our son Timothy arrived at Whitmore Academy, a defiant, unruly boy of 12. When he returned home for Christmas break, he was polite, studious, and completely transformed. Dr. Whitmore's methods are nothing short of miraculous." Similar praise came from families nationwide. The Astors of New York sent their youngest son after a series of behavioral incidents at traditional schools. The Carnegies recommended the academy to business associates. By 1925, Whitmore Academy had a waiting list of over 200 children, despite its hefty annual tuition of $2,000, equivalent to $30,000 today. The staff Dr. Whitmore assembled reflected his commitment to scientific child rearing. Dr. Helena Voss, a German immigrant with a doctorate in experimental psychology, served as the head of behavioral studies. Her research focused on memory reconstruction and personality realignment. Dr. Marcus Fleming, a former military physician, oversaw the medical program, specializing in what he termed somatic interventions for behavioral problems. The faculty also included Sister Mary Catherine, a former nun who had left her order to pursue secular salvation through education, and Professor James Hartwell, a linguistics expert who developed the Academy's communication protocols. These protocols mandated that all student correspondence home be reviewed and edited for clarity and positivity. The Academy's daily schedule was rigorous. Students woke at 5:30 a.m. for morning meditation, a period of enforced silence that lasted until breakfast at 7:20 a.m. Classes began at 8:01 a.m. and continued until 6:01 p.m., with only a brief lunch break. Evening hours were devoted to reflection and improvement, individual sessions with staff members designed to address character deficiencies. The curriculum combined traditional subjects with Whitmore's own innovations. Mathematics and literature were taught alongside social harmony, proper deportment, and mental hygiene. Students learned to suppress what the staff called primitive impulses, crying, anger, defiance, or excessive emotional expression of any kind. The Academy's reputation grew partly due to its selective admission process. Not every child was accepted. Whitmore personally interviewed each prospective student, conducting what he called aptitude assessments to determine their malleability quotient. Children who scored too low were quietly rejected. Those who scored high were fast-tracked for admission, often beginning their studies within weeks of their initial assessment. Local newspapers regularly featured stories about the Academy's successes. The Clearwater Tribune ran a series of articles in 1924 titled Montana's Educational Jewel, praising Whitmore's innovative approaches. The articles highlighted the Academy's modern facilities, its distinguished faculty, and the remarkable transformations achieved by its students. Dr. Whitmore has created something truly revolutionary, wrote Tribune editor Robert Clearwater. His methods produce results that traditional education cannot match. The children who graduate from his academy are models of discipline and achievement. The Academy also gained attention from academic circles. Educational journals published Whitmore's research on accelerated personality development and systematic character formation. His techniques were studied and emulated by institutions across the country. Several universities invited him to lecture on his methods, and he was considered for a position at the United States Department of Education. Parents who visited the Academy came away impressed. The grounds were immaculate, the facilities modern, and the students they encountered were invariably polite and well-behaved. During these visits, which were scheduled well in advance, parents observed classes where children sat perfectly still, answered questions in unison, and demonstrated remarkable academic achievement. "The transformation in our daughter was immediate and complete," wrote Charles Pemberton, a railroad magnate from Chicago, in a letter to his brother. Within 6 months at Whitmore Academy, she evolved from a willful, disobedient child into a young lady of exceptional breeding and intelligence. We could not be more pleased with the results. The Academy's success attracted the attention of child welfare organizations and government officials. In 1926, the Montana State Board of Education granted Whitmore Academy full accreditation, praising its innovative approaches to character development and academic excellence. The accreditation report noted the school's exceptionally low student-to-teacher ratio and individualized attention to each child's specific needs. Dr. Whitmore himself became a respected figure in educational circles. He served on the board of the American Association of Child Psychologists and was a frequent speaker at conferences on educational reform. His methods were studied in university education programs, and several former staff members went on to establish similar institutions in other states. The Academy's influence extended beyond education. Law enforcement agencies consulted with Whitmore on juvenile delinquency cases, and several judges began ordering troubled youth to attend the Academy as an alternative to reform school. The institution's success in rehabilitating difficult children made it a preferred option for families and courts dealing with problematic youth. By the late 1920s, Whitmore Academy had become a model for progressive education nationwide. Its graduates went on to prestigious universities and successful careers, carrying with them the discipline and character formation they had received during their time at the institution. The Academy's methods were praised as representing the future of child rearing, a scientific approach that could eliminate behavioral problems and create ideal citizens. The waiting list continued to grow, and Dr. Whitmore began construction of additional dormitories to accommodate the increasing demand. The expansion included a new medical facility and an enlarged character development center, reflecting the Academy's commitment to its core mission of transforming problematic children into productive members of society. Local businesses thrived from the Academy's presence. The institution employed over 50 people, making it one of the largest employers in the region. Supply contracts with local merchants, regular visits from wealthy parents, and the Academy's own agricultural operations contributed significantly to the area's economy. The Academy's reputation seemed unassailable. Its methods were scientific, its results demonstrable, and its mission noble. Parents, educators, and government officials viewed it as a beacon of progressive thinking, proof that traditional approaches to child rearing could be improved through the application of modern psychological principles. As the 1920s drew to a close, Whitmore Academy stood as the pinnacle of educational achievement, an institution that had successfully merged scientific rigor with humanitarian purpose. Its founder, Dr. Cornelius Whitmore, was hailed as a visionary who had revolutionized the way society approached the challenge of raising and educating children. The Academy's success story seemed destined to continue indefinitely, a testament to the power of scientific methods applied to human development. The only shadow on this bright picture was the Academy's policy of limiting contact between students and their families during the intensive development period, typically the first year of enrollment. This policy, Whitmore explained, was necessary to prevent interference with the delicate process of character formation. Most parents accepted this explanation, trusting in the Academy's proven track record of success. Few questioned why some children never wrote home, or why certain families received only brief formal updates about their child's progress. The Academy's reputation for excellence overshadowed such minor concerns, and the impressive results achieved. By graduates served as proof that Whitmore's methods, however unconventional, were undeniably effective. The first documented concern about Whitmore Academy appeared in a letter dated March 15, 1927, buried in the files of the Montana State Police. Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood of Denver had written to request assistance in locating her 13-year-old son, Daniel, who had been enrolled at the Academy 8 months earlier. "I have not received a single letter from my boy since October," Mrs. Blackwood wrote. "When I telephone the school, I am told that Daniel is progressing well, but that direct contact would interfere with his treatment. I am growing concerned, as this silence is completely unlike my son's character." The police response, filed 3 days later, was brief. Matter referred to local authorities. Academy administration confirms student welfare. No further action required. Similar inquiries began appearing with increasing frequency. The Clearwater County Sheriff's Office received 7 missing person reports between 1927 and 1929, all concerning children enrolled at Whitmore Academy. Each report followed the same pattern. Parents had lost contact with their children, received only formal updates from the school, and grown concerned about the prolonged silence. Sheriff William Morrison, a practical man who had served in the position for 12 years, initially dismissed these concerns. "These are troubled children sent to a special school," he noted. "It's natural that their treatment would require isolation from previous influences. Dr. Whitmore's methods are well respected, and the school has full state accreditation." However, Morrison's perspective began to shift following a disturbing encounter in October. While patrolling the mountain roads near the Academy, he discovered a 14-year-old boy walking alone, barefoot and wearing only a nightgown, 7 miles from the school grounds. The boy, who gave his name as Peter Hutchinson, was severely malnourished and appeared to be in a state of mental confusion. The boy kept repeating the same phrases, Morrison wrote in his incident report. He would say, "I remember now," and "the lessons are complete," over and over. When I asked him about his family, he claimed he had no family and had never lived anywhere but the Academy. He seemed genuinely confused when I suggested he must have parents somewhere. Morrison returned Peter to the Academy, where Dr. Whitmore explained that the boy had experienced a psychological episode related to his treatment. "Peter suffers from severe delusional tendencies," Whitmore told the sheriff. His mind creates false memories and imagined persecution. This episode, while concerning, is actually a positive sign that our therapy is working to break down his fantasy constructs. Whitmore provided Morrison with Peter's medical file, which detailed a history of violent outbursts, compulsive lying, and resistance to authority. The file noted that Peter had been making excellent progress until the recent setback, and that his parents had been informed of the incident. Dr. Whitmore seemed genuinely concerned about the boy, Morrison later told a colleague. He showed me detailed treatment records and explained how these episodes sometimes occur during intensive therapy. Everything appeared to be handled professionally. Despite Whitmore's reassurances, Morrison began paying closer attention to reports about the academy. He discovered that several children reported missing by their parents had supposedly been transferred to other institutions for specialized treatment. When Morrison requested details about these transfers, academy staff provided official-looking documents indicating the children had been moved to facilities in distant states. The documents appeared legitimate, complete with letterheads from respected institutions in California, New York, and Florida. Each transfer was explained as being in the child's best interest, necessitated by their specific therapeutic needs. Parents were told that contact with their children would be maintained through the new facilities, but follow-up inquiries often revealed that the receiving institutions had no record of the transferred students. Dr. Whitmore's explanations for these discrepancies were always plausible. Administrative errors, he claimed, sometimes resulted in children being enrolled under different names to protect their privacy. Some institutions specialized in cases so sensitive that they maintained minimal records. Other children had been placed with private families as part of an experimental foster care program. The modern treatment of troubled youth requires flexibility, Whitmore explained to concerned parents. Traditional record-keeping sometimes interferes with therapeutic progress. Our primary concern is your child's welfare, not bureaucratic documentation. The Academy's reputation continued to shield it from serious scrutiny. Local business leaders, who benefited from the institution's economic impact, dismissed concerns as the complaints of overprotective parents. State education officials pointed to the Academy's continued accreditation and the success of its graduates as evidence that Whitmore's methods, while unconventional, were effective. However, disturbing patterns began emerging among the Academy's graduates. Several former students, now adults, began seeking psychological treatment for what they described as memory problems and identity confusion. Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychiatrist in Helena, treated 3 former Whitmore students between 1930 and 1932, all presenting similar symptoms. These young people displayed unusual psychological profiles, Dr. Chen noted in her case files. They demonstrated exceptional compliance and academic achievement, but seemed to lack normal emotional responses. More concerning, they appeared to have significant gaps in their childhood memories, particularly regarding their time before entering Whitmore Academy. Dr. Chen's most detailed case study involved Rebecca Ashford, a 19-year-old former student who sought treatment for severe anxiety and recurring nightmares. Rebecca had graduated from Whitmore Academy in 1930 with honors and had been accepted to Vassar College. However, she began experiencing psychological difficulties during her freshman year. Patient presents with symptoms of dissociative amnesia, Dr. Chen wrote. She has no clear memories of her life before age 14 when she entered Whitmore Academy. She claims her parents died in a car accident, but becomes extremely agitated when asked for details. Her academic records from Whitmore are exemplary, but she cannot recall specific classes, teachers, or fellow students. When Dr. Chen contacted Rebecca's family, she discovered that the young woman's parents were alive and well, living in Portland, Oregon. They had enrolled Rebecca at Whitmore Academy when she was 12, seeking help for what they described as mild behavioral problems. They had maintained regular correspondence with their daughter throughout her time at the academy and were shocked to learn of her memory difficulties. Rebecca's letters home were always cheerful and positive, her mother told Dr. Chen. She wrote about her classes, her friends, and her activities. There was never any indication of problems or unhappiness. We thought the academy had been wonderful for her. Dr. Chen's investigation revealed several inconsistencies in Rebecca's account of her time at the academy. The young woman claimed to have lived in a dormitory with 20 other girls, but the academy's records showed she had been housed in the special care wing, which typically held only 5 or 6 students at a time. Rebecca also described participating in normal school activities, sports, drama, music, but the academy had no record of her involvement in any extracurricular programs. Most disturbing was Rebecca's physical condition. Dr. Chen's examination revealed evidence of previous medical procedures, including what appeared to be surgical scars on the patient's scalp and signs of repeated injections in her arms. When asked about these marks, Rebecca claimed they resulted from routine medical care, but could provide no specific details about any treatments she had received. Dr. Chen attempted to contact other former Whitmore students to investigate whether Rebecca's case was unique. However, she discovered that tracking down academy graduates was surprisingly difficult. Many seemed to have disappeared after leaving the school, with no forwarding addresses or contact information. Those she did locate were reluctant to discuss their experiences, offering only brief positive comments about their education. The academy provided excellent training, was a typical response. I learned discipline and focus that have served me well in life. Dr. Whitmore's methods were highly effective. When pressed for specific details about their time at the school, former students became evasive or claimed not to remember. Several ended the conversations abruptly when asked about missing classmates or unusual medical procedures. Meanwhile, reports of missing children continued to accumulate. The Clearwater County Sheriff's Office received 12 additional inquiries between 1930 and 1932, all following the same pattern. Parents had lost contact with children enrolled at Whitmore Academy and were told the students had been transferred to other facilities. Sheriff Morrison began maintaining his own informal records of these cases. His files, discovered years later, revealed a systematic pattern of disappearances that the academy consistently explained away. In nearly every case, parents had been provided with official documentation of their child's transfer, but subsequent investigations failed to locate the children at the supposed destination facilities. Morrison's growing concerns were shared by other local officials. The town's postmaster, Henry Dalton, noticed that mail addressed to certain academy students was returned as undeliverable, despite the school's claims that the students were still enrolled. The town doctor, Michael Aberdeen, reported that the academy had begun refusing to allow him to provide routine medical care to students, claiming that all health services were now handled by the school's specialized medical staff. Most significantly, several academy employees began leaving their positions under mysterious circumstances. In 1931, 3 teachers resigned within a single month, all citing philosophical differences with the school's educational methods. One of these teachers, Miss Caroline Fletcher, disappeared entirely after leaving her position, abandoning her apartment and personal belongings without explanation. Dr. Whitmore attributed these departures to the demanding nature of the academy's work. Our methods require complete dedication, he explained to concerned parents. Not everyone is suited to the intensive approach necessary for treating troubled youth. We prefer to part ways with staff members who cannot fully embrace our philosophy. The Academy's response to growing scrutiny was to become even more secretive. Visiting hours were reduced and then eliminated entirely. Parents were told that outside contact would interfere with their children's treatment. The school implemented new privacy policies that restricted information sharing with anyone not directly involved in a child's care. These changes were presented as progressive improvements designed to protect student welfare. The Academy's literature emphasized the importance of creating a controlled therapeutic environment free from outside interference. Parents were assured that their children's best interests were the school's primary concern, and that temporary isolation was a necessary component of effective treatment. By 1933, Whitmore Academy had become effectively impenetrable to outside observation. The institution continued to operate with full state accreditation, maintained its reputation for educational excellence, and attracted new students from wealthy families across the country. However, the growing list of missing children and the pattern of unexplained transfers had begun to create a shadow of doubt that would eventually lead to more serious investigations. The Academy's isolation worked both ways. Protected the institution from scrutiny, it also made it increasingly difficult for anyone to verify what was actually happening within its walls. The whispers of concern that had begun in 1927 were gradually becoming a chorus of unanswered questions, but the Academy's reputation and the complexity of its explanations continued to shield it from serious investigation. The stage was set for revelations that would ultimately expose the true nature of Dr. Whitmore's progressive educational methods and the fate of the hundreds of children who had disappeared into the Academy's carefully maintained facade of respectability. The first crack in Whitmore Academy's protective wall came from an unexpected source. In November 1934, 17-year-old Thomas Brennan appeared at the Clearwater police station, disheveled and speaking in barely coherent whispers. He claimed to be a student at the Academy, who had escaped during a transfer to what he called the lower facility. Thomas presented a disturbing appearance. His head had been partially shaved in an irregular pattern, revealing what appeared to be injection sites along his scalp. His arms bore systematic scars that looked like deliberate incisions rather than accidental injuries. Most concerning was his mental state. He spoke in a mechanical, rehearsed manner, as if reciting memorized responses to questions he had been trained to expect. "I am Thomas Michael Brennan, student identification number 247, he told. "I have been at the Academy for 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. I was being transferred to the completion facility when I experienced a memory restoration event. I remembered my actual name and my actual parents. I remembered that I was not supposed to be there." Officer Walsh's initial report described Thomas as appearing drugged or hypnotized. The boy answered questions with unnatural precision, providing detailed information about the Academy's daily routines, but claimed to have no memory of his life before enrollment. When asked about his parents, Thomas became visibly agitated, repeating phrases like "family bonds inhibit development" and "previous attachments compromise therapeutic progress." Dr. Margaret Sinclair, the town's only physician with psychiatric training, examined Thomas and documented her findings in a report that would later become crucial evidence. "Patient exhibits signs of severe psychological conditioning," she wrote. "His responses suggest systematic memory suppression combined with intensive behavioral modification. Physical examination reveals evidence of repeated medical procedures, including what appears to be experimental brain surgery." Dr. Sinclair's most disturbing discovery was a small metal implant beneath the skin behind Thomas's left ear. The device, roughly the size of a coin, appeared to be some kind of electronic apparatus. When she attempted to remove it for examination, Thomas became violently ill, experiencing seizures and temporary paralysis. The implant remained in place, but X-rays revealed similar devices in his skull and spine. Thomas's account of life inside the Academy contradicted everything the institution claimed about its methods and facilities. He described a complex underground facility beneath the main buildings, accessible through hidden passages in the basement. This lower facility contained medical laboratories, surgical suites, and dozens of small cells where students underwent what Thomas called personality reconstruction. "They bring you down when you arrive," Thomas explained to Dr. Sinclair. "First you go to orientation, where they explain that your old life was a lie. They show you documents proving that your parents signed away their rights to you, that you're now property of the Academy. Then begins the memory removal process." According to Thomas, the memory removal process involved a combination of drugs, surgical procedures, and psychological conditioning. Students were kept in isolation chambers for weeks at a time, subjected to constant audio recordings that repeated Academy doctrine while their brains were chemically suppressed. Surgical procedures gradually removed specific memories while implanting new ones designed to ensure compliance. "They don't just want you to obey," Thomas said. "They want you to believe that obedience is your natural state, that you were born to serve the Academy's purposes. They remake your entire personality. From the inside out." The completion facility Thomas mentioned was apparently the final stage of this process. Students who had undergone successful personality reconstruction were moved to a separate building where they lived under constant supervision while being trained for their eventual roles as Academy graduates. These students were taught to write letters home, to interact normally with visitors, and to serve as evidence of the Academy's success. Thomas claimed that the Academy's public face, the impressive campus, the scholarly faculty, the testimonials from satisfied parents, was an elaborate deception. The real Academy existed underground, where hundreds of children were systematically stripped of their identities and rebuilt as perfectly compliant human machines. "The children you see during visits aren't real students," Thomas explained. "They're the ones who completed the process successfully. They've been programmed to perform happiness, to demonstrate academic achievement, to prove that the Academy works. The real students, the ones still being processed, are kept underground where no one can see them." Dr. Sinclair's attempts to verify Thomas's claims initially met with frustration. The Academy's administration denied that any student by that name had ever been enrolled. Dr. Whitmore, personally, assured Sheriff Morrison that Thomas was likely a disturbed young man seeking attention, possibly someone with a history of mental illness who had fixated on the Academy. However, Thomas possessed detailed knowledge about the Academy's layout, staff members, and daily routines that would have been impossible to acquire without spending significant time at the institution. He knew the names of teachers, the schedules of classes, and the locations of buildings that weren't visible from the main road. More significantly, he accurately described several missing children, providing details about their personalities and backgrounds that matched their parents' descriptions. The breakthrough came when Thomas mentioned Emily Warwick, a 12-year-old girl who had been reported missing by her parents in 1932. Thomas described Emily's distinctive birthmark, her fear of heights, and her habit of humming while nervous, details that had never been publicly reported but were confirmed by her family. Emily was in cell 17, Thomas told Dr. Sinclair. She resisted the memory procedures longer than most. They had to use the deep conditioning protocols. Last time I saw her, she didn't remember her own name. Sheriff Morrison finally decided to investigate the Academy directly. On December 3, 1934, he arrived at the institution with a warrant to search for Thomas Brennan, claiming the boy was a material witness in an unrelated criminal case. Dr. Whitmore was cooperative, providing a complete tour of the facilities and allowing Morrison to speak with current students. The visit appeared to confirm the Academy's legitimacy. Students were well-dressed, articulate, and enthusiastic about their education. They spoke positively about their teachers, their classes, and their progress. Several mentioned receiving letters from home and looking forward to upcoming visits from their families. However, Morrison noticed several details that troubled him. Every student he encountered gave remarkably similar answers to his questions, using identical phrases to. When he asked to see specific areas of the campus, he was told that certain buildings were under renovation or restricted for safety reasons. Most significantly, none of the students he met matched the descriptions of missing children he was investigating. Morrison's report on the visit was initially positive, noting the Academy's impressive facilities and the apparent well-being of its students. However, a handwritten addendum revealed his private concerns. "Something feels wrong about this place. The students all talk the same way, like they're reading from a script, and I never did." See those basement areas the boy mentioned. The investigation might have ended there, but Thomas's condition began to deteriorate rapidly. The metal implants in his body appeared to be causing progressive neurological damage. He developed severe headaches, experienced memory lapses, and began showing signs of personality regression. Dr. Sinclair documented these changes, noting that Thomas seemed to be reverting to the conditioned responses he had exhibited upon his arrival. "It's as if the devices in his body are pulling him back," Dr. Sinclair wrote. "His natural personality is being gradually suppressed, replaced by the artificial conditioning he received at the academy. Without intervention, I believe he will lose all memory of his escape and his true identity." Dr. Sinclair contacted colleagues at medical centers in larger cities, seeking expertise in dealing with Thomas's unusual condition. Dr. Harrison Mills at Johns Hopkins University agreed to examine the boy, intrigued by reports of the mysterious implants and their apparent effects on memory and behavior. Dr. Mills's examination, conducted in January 1935, provided the first scientific documentation of the Academy's methods. Using advanced X-ray equipment, he identified multiple devices throughout Thomas's nervous system, including several that appeared to be actively transmitting signals. The implants were far more sophisticated than anything known to contemporary medical science, suggesting access to experimental technology unavailable to most institutions. These devices represent a level of neurological intervention that borders on science fiction, Dr. Mills wrote in his report. They appear designed to monitor and control brain function at a level I would not have thought possible. The implications for the field of neuroscience are staggering, but the ethical violations are beyond measure. Dr. Mills attempted to remove one of the smaller implants for analysis, but the procedure triggered a massive seizure that nearly killed Thomas. It became clear that the devices were integrated into his nervous system in ways that made removal extremely dangerous. Any attempt to disable the Academy's control mechanisms risked permanent brain damage or death. The medical evidence finally convinced authorities to take Thomas's claims seriously. Federal agents from the newly formed Federal Bureau of Investigation were contacted, and a preliminary investigation was authorized. However, the Academy's political connections proved formidable. Dr. Whitmore's reputation in educational circles, combined with testimonials from wealthy and influential parents, created significant resistance to any investigation that might damage the institution. The investigation was further complicated by the disappearance of key evidence. Dr. Sinclair's medical files on Thomas were stolen from her office in February 1935. Dr. Mills's X-rays and analysis reports vanished from Johns Hopkins University. Even Thomas himself disappeared from the Clearwater Hospital where he was being treated, leaving behind only a note claiming he had decided to return to the Academy voluntarily. "Patient has recovered his appreciation for the Academy's beneficial influence," the note read. "Previous statements were the result of temporary psychological disturbance. Treatment is no longer necessary." The handwriting matched Thomas's, but Dr. Sinclair noted that his writing style had changed dramatically, reverting to the mechanical precision he had exhibited immediately after his escape. It appeared that the Academy had somehow reasserted control over the boy, either through the implants or through direct intervention. Despite these setbacks, the investigation had generated enough evidence to warrant continued scrutiny. FBI agent Robert Hartley was assigned to conduct a comprehensive review of the Academy's operations, with particular attention to the reports of missing children and the allegations of medical experimentation. Agent Hartley's investigation uncovered a pattern of financial irregularities that suggested the Academy's operations were far more extensive than publicly acknowledged. Records showed payments to medical equipment suppliers, pharmaceutical companies, and construction firms that exceeded what would be reasonable for a normal boarding school. Most intriguingly, the Academy appeared to be receiving funding from sources that were difficult to trace, including what appeared to be government agencies operating under classified programs. The investigation also revealed that several Academy graduates had gone on to positions in sensitive government and military roles, despite having no clear qualifications for such positions. These individuals demonstrated the same unusual psychological profiles noted by Dr. Chen: exceptional compliance and achievement combined with significant memory gaps and emotional detachment. It appears that the Academy may be operating as more than an educational institution. Agent Hartley wrote in his preliminary report. The evidence suggests possible involvement in experimental programs related to psychological conditioning and behavioral control. The implications for national security warrant immediate and thorough investigation. However, before Agent Hartley could complete his investigation, he was reassigned to an unrelated case and ordered to transfer all Academy-related materials to appropriate channels. The files disappeared into classified archives, and no further federal investigation was conducted. The brief window of official scrutiny had revealed enough to confirm the darkest suspicions about Whitmore Academy. The institution was indeed conducting systematic experiments on children using advanced technology to erase memories and reconstruct personalities. The missing children had not been transferred to other facilities. They had been transformed into something entirely different, their original identities destroyed and replaced with artificial constructs designed to serve the Academy's purposes. But the Academy's powerful connections and the classified nature of its true mission ensured that these discoveries would remain hidden from public view. The institution continued to operate, its reputation intact, while the evidence of its crimes was buried in government files that would remain sealed for decades to come. The end of Whitmore Academy came not through investigation or justice, but through the very ambitions that had sustained it. In the spring of 1946, Dr. Cornelius Whitmore initiated what internal documents would later reveal as Project Culmination, an attempt to expand the Academy's operations beyond its isolated Montana campus to a network of facilities across the United States. The project's existence became known only through a cache of documents discovered in 1962, when the abandoned Academy buildings were finally demolished. Hidden within a sealed vault beneath the medical laboratory, construction workers found over 3,000 pages of records, photographs, and correspondence that detailed the true scope of the institution's activities during its final years. Among these documents was Dr. Whitmore's personal journal, which revealed the progressive deterioration of both his mental state and the Academy's operations. The entries, beginning in January 1946, documented his growing paranoia about government oversight and his obsession with what he called the completion of the great work. The limited scope of our current facility restricts our ability to achieve true societal transformation, Whitmore wrote on February 14, 1946. We have perfected the techniques necessary to reshape human consciousness, but our impact remains constrained by numbers. Project Culmination will allow us to process thousands of subjects annually, creating a generation of perfectly conditioned citizens. The project involved establishing Academy facilities in 12 major cities, each designed to appear as legitimate private schools while conducting the same experimental procedures that had been refined in Montana. Whitmore had secured preliminary funding from sources he identified only as interested parties in Washington and had begun recruiting staff for the new institutions. However, the expansion project exposed the Academy to scrutiny from investigators who had been tracking the institution's financial activities. IRS agent Patricia Morrison, no relation to the local sheriff, had been conducting a routine audit of the Academy's tax-exempt status when she discovered financial irregularities that suggested a much larger operation than what was publicly acknowledged. Morrison's investigation revealed that the Academy had been receiving substantial funding from a network of shell companies and government agencies operating under classified budgets. The financial trail led to connections with military intelligence services, pharmaceutical companies conducting experimental research, and private organizations with ties to eugenics movements. The Academy's finances suggest an operation far beyond the scope of private education, Morrison wrote in her confidential report to the Treasury Department. The institution appears to be receiving funding for experimental programs that may violate federal laws regarding human subjects research. The amounts involved suggest activities on a scale that would require direct government authorization. Morrison's investigation was complicated by the discovery that many of the Academy's financial records had been deliberately falsified. Bank statements, donor lists, and expenditure reports contained systematic discrepancies that appeared designed to conceal the true sources and uses of the institution's funds. The level of sophistication in these deceptions suggested professional assistance from individuals with extensive experience in classified financial operations. The investigation gained urgency when Morrison discovered that several former Academy students had died under suspicious circumstances in the years following their graduation. Death certificates cited various causes: suicide, accident, sudden illness, but the pattern suggested something more systematic. Many of these deaths occurred just as the former students were beginning to recover memories of their time at the Academy. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, a former Academy student who had graduated in 1940, died in her apartment in Chicago in March 1946. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, but Dr. Hartwell had been in excellent health and had recently contacted a journalist about her experiences at the Academy. Her roommate reported that Dr. Hartwell had been experiencing severe headaches and had mentioned feeling like someone was watching her thoughts. Similar deaths occurred in Boston, New York, and San Francisco, all involving former Academy students who had begun questioning their memories or seeking medical help for neurological problems. In each case, autopsies revealed the presence of the same type of implants that had been discovered in Thomas Brennan, but the devices were found to be inactive, as if they had been remotely disabled. The pattern suggested that the Academy maintained the ability to monitor and control its former students long after they left the institution. More disturbingly, it indicated that those who began to recover their original memories or threatened to expose the Academy's activities were systematically eliminated. Agent Morrison's investigation was abruptly terminated in April 1946 when she was informed that the Academy's operations fell under national security classifications that superseded tax law enforcement. She was ordered to transfer all materials to military intelligence and to cease any further investigation. Her subsequent attempts to discuss the case were met with threats of prosecution under the Espionage Act. However, Morrison had managed to alert several journalists about discoveries before being silenced. Reporter Sarah McCann of the Chicago Tribune began investigating the Academy independently, focusing on the suspicious deaths of former students and the institution's financial connections to government agencies. McCann's investigation was cut short when she received a visit from federal agents who confiscated her research materials and informed her that publication of any information about the Academy would constitute a threat to national security. McCann was forced to abandon her investigation, but not before she had shared her findings with colleagues in other cities. The pressure of increased scrutiny, combined with the demands of Project Culmination, began to take a toll on the Academy's operations. Staff members reported that Dr. Whitmore had become increasingly erratic, spending most of his time in the underground laboratories and rarely appearing at the main campus. Students who had previously exhibited perfect compliance began showing signs of psychological breakdown, as if the conditioning systems were failing. The Academy's carefully maintained facade began to crumble in the summer of 1946. Parents who had accepted years of limited contact with their children suddenly began demanding immediate access. Several influential families threatened legal action if they were not allowed to visit their children without restriction. The Academy's standard explanations about therapeutic necessity no longer satisfied parents who had grown suspicious about the institution's true activities. Dr. Whitmore's response to these pressures was to accelerate the completion of current students while preparing to evacuate the facility. According to his journal entries, he believed that external investigations were close to exposing the Academy's operations and that Project Culmination had to be abandoned in favor of preserving the core research. "The ignorant masses are not ready for the truth of our work," Whitmore wrote on August 3, 1946. "We must preserve our research and our most successful subjects until a more enlightened time allows for proper continuation. The current generation of students must be processed through final protocols before evacuation commences." The Final protocols apparently involved the systematic elimination of students who had not successfully completed the conditioning process. According to documents found in the vault, 73 children were classified as incomplete subjects and scheduled for what Whitmore termed humanitarian termination. These children retained too much of their original personalities to serve as convincing graduates, but knew too much about the Academy's operations to be safely released. The planned terminations were prevented by an unexpected intervention. On August 15, 1946, a massive fire broke out in the Academy's main laboratory building, apparently caused by an explosion in the chemical storage area. The fire spread rapidly through the underground facilities, destroying much of the equipment and forcing the evacuation of staff and students. Among those evacuated were 23 children who showed signs of incomplete conditioning. They appeared confused and disoriented, speaking in fragments about their original families and lives before the Academy. Local fire department personnel and volunteers from Clearwater witnessed these children's condition, making it impossible for Academy staff to explain away their obvious trauma and confusion. The fire investigation revealed the existence of the underground facilities that Thomas Brennan had described. 12 years earlier, fire investigators found evidence of medical laboratories, surgical suites and detention cells that had no legitimate purpose in an educational institution. They also discovered the remains of the 47 wooden boxes that would later be identified as containing personal effects of missing children. However, by the time investigators arrived, Dr. Whitmore and most of his senior staff had disappeared. The Academy's financial accounts had been emptied, its records destroyed, and its key personnel vanished without trace. The institution's board of directors claimed to have no knowledge of the underground facilities or the experimental programs, insisting that they had believed the Academy to be operating as a legitimate educational institution. The 23 children rescued from the fire were placed in the care of state welfare services, but their conditions made rehabilitation extremely difficult. Most exhibited symptoms similar to those observed in Thomas Brennan: memory gaps, artificial personality traits, and evidence of surgical procedures. Several still carried active implants that caused seizures when removal was attempted. Efforts to reunite these children with their families were largely unsuccessful. Many had been at the Academy for so long that their original identities had been completely erased. Others had been reported dead by the Academy years earlier, and their families had already grieved and moved on. The few successful reunifications were traumatic for all involved, as the children had no memory of their previous lives and struggled to form emotional connections with their biological families. The official investigation into the Academy concluded that it had been operating an unauthorized medical research program, guise of educational services. However, the scope and nature of the research were classified as national security matters, and most details were never made public. The investigation's final report, heavily redacted, concluded that certain experimental programs exceeded authorized parameters, but made no specific findings about criminal activity. No criminal charges were ever filed in connection with the Academy's operations. Dr. Whitmore was never located, despite an extensive search by federal authorities. Most of his staff similarly disappeared, though several were later identified as having assumed new identities and positions at other institutions around the world. The families of missing children were provided with death certificates, indicating that their children had died in the fire, though no bodies were ever recovered. This official conclusion allowed for insurance, settlements, and legal closure, but left many parents with unanswered questions about what had actually happened to their children. The Academy's property was seized by the federal government and remained vacant for 16 years before being demolished. Local residents reported strange phenomena during this period: unexplained lights in the abandoned buildings, sounds of children crying, and electronic interference that affected radio and television reception. These reports were dismissed as folklore, but they persisted until the buildings were finally destroyed. The demolition of the Academy in 1962 was supposed to mark the end of the institution's dark legacy. However, the discovery of the hidden vault and its cache of documents revealed that the Academy's influence had extended far beyond its Montana. The documents included correspondence with similar institutions around the world, suggesting that the techniques developed at Whitmore Academy had been shared with other experimental programs. More disturbing was the discovery that many Academy graduates had gone on to positions of significant influence in government, military, and corporate leadership. These individuals continued to exhibit the behavioral characteristics instilled by their conditioning: absolute loyalty to authority, emotional detachment, and an unwavering commitment to institutional goals, regardless of ethical considerations. The documents suggested that this outcome had been intentional, that the Academy had been designed not just to control individual children, but to place conditioned agents in positions where they could influence society according to the institution's agenda. The scope of this infiltration remained unknown, as the conditioning made it impossible for affected individuals to recognize or reveal their manipulation. The final document in the vault was a letter from Dr. Whitmore, apparently written shortly before his disappearance. The letter was addressed to future researchers and contained his reflections on the Academy's work and his plans for its continuation. The work begun at Whitmore Academy represents humanity's first step towards scientific control of human consciousness, the letter stated. Though circumstances have forced the termination of our current operations, the techniques we have developed will eventually be recognized as essential tools for social progress. The subjects we have processed carry within them the seeds of a new social order, one based on rational compliance rather than primitive emotion. The letter concluded with a chilling prediction: those who believe our work has ended with the closing of this facility are naive. The Academy exists now in the minds of our graduates, in the methods we have shared with colleagues around the world, and in the understanding we have gained about the malleable nature of human identity. Every child we have processed becomes a center of influence, spreading our principles through their own families and communities. The Academy's true legacy lies not in this building, but in the transformation of society itself. The vault documents were classified by federal authorities and remained sealed until 1987, when the construction crew's discovery of the wooden boxes forced their partial release. Even then, most of the documents were heavily redacted, with only basic information about the Academy's operations made available to researchers and journalists. Today, nearly 8 decades after the Academy's closure, questions remain about the full extent of its operations and influence. The 312 children who disappeared into Whitmore Academy were never accounted for, their fates unknown. The techniques developed by Dr. Whitmore and his staff have never been fully documented or understood, and the network of graduates who carry the Academy's conditioning continues to operate in positions of power and influence, their true loyalties hidden even from themselves. The wooden boxes discovered in 1987 remain the only tangible evidence of the Academy's victims. They sit in a federal warehouse, catalogued but never claimed, containing the last traces of children whose very existence has been erased from official records. Their contents, glasses, shoes, diary pages, and locks of hair, serve as silent testimony to lives cut short and identities destroyed in service of an experiment that society was never meant to discover. The Academy's legacy lives on not in justice or accountability, but in the enduring questions about how such an institution could operate undetected for so long, who enabled its activities, and whether similar programs continue to operate under different names and in different locations. The silence that protected the Academy for 27 years continues to protect those responsible, ensuring that the full truth about Whitmore Academy known.